Well, thank you. So Harry, what I want to do is shift and have us have a conversation around leading in times of crisis. Harry's the author of a book that I mentioned at the beginning, Navigating an Organizational Crisis. And my sense is that at this moment in time, as we look at the coronavirus epidemic as it unfolds, depending upon what industry you're in, you're fully in a crisis, or you are in an industry that is preparing for the possibility, which is as bad because you have actually no idea what's really going to happen. Harry, I would love for you to just share with us some of the key insights that you have discovered from your journey of working with leaders and interviewing leaders on how do you thrive versus just survive in these crazy times that we're in now?
I think it's a big question, especially now. May I say just a sentence or two about how I got into this topic? I got into it because a friend of mine who was Martha Johnson, who was the head of the General Services Administration. In fact, she was the highest ranking woman in the US in terms of the size of the organization that she was running. And on a technicality that it turns out wasn't even that, she got thrown out of office because the Obama administration was so nervous about, oh, we don't have any criticism of any of our agencies. This seems like such old-fashioned news now compared to where we are. So she had the cardboard box treatment, and then she got hauled before Congress and grilled. It was horrendous. And as her friend, we were friends at Cummins, and we are friends to this day. We began to talk about this, and the way forward for her, I think, and for us, I was sharing her misery, was to talk to other people and say, well, hold it, Martha, let's expand the network here and see if other people have had similar awful situations like this. And so we agreed, and we went out and interviewed people. We ended up interviewing something like 60 leaders and looked for patterns. And we found some patterns. One pattern is every leader has had a crisis. Every leader has had a traumatic experience at home, at work, and most of these they recover from, they grow from, and they don't take them down. But a lot of these things are near misses. And some leaders wouldn't talk to us because it was too painfully still. Some were in tears. So we knew we were on to something. And what we were on to was to say, let's talk about those, you talk about crucible moments, talk about a crucible moment when, you're the leader, you're in charge, you can't run out the door, you can't resign, you're it. Now play out the story. So we talked to people, and it turns out that there's a literature of crisis management out there that's voluminous. And it's right now, you can imagine it's growing by the moment, thanks to coronavirus. How to handle it. Well, if you look at that literature, what you find is it's management, it's not leadership. It's not about the leader. It's not about the people in the organization, except what they should do and what they shouldn't do. And here are the rules, and here's some good practices. It turns out that leaders are in a double bind when a crisis hits. Here's what I mean. First of all, they're in charge of the organization. They're held accountable. They cannot hide. They are being looked at, and they are looked at with some blame, because if it's a crisis, it's the leader's job, by the way, to keep us safe. And if we're not safe, then the leader has not done her job right. So that's part one of the bind. The other part is leaders are human beings too. And so if there's a crisis, there's a trauma, they're suffering. They've got to get through it as well. And how do they separate the two, and or combine the two, or make a synthesis? And so one of the big lessons is you don't become stone-faced and hide all of your misery from the organization when you're being affected as well. If there's a death, if there's a tragedy, if there's something really awful that's happened, you're affected too. And if you pretend otherwise, you're not helping. So the question is, how do you share your feelings with the organization and yet also provide meaning and truth is what people want to hear. So that's what we found. And again, big gap between the leadership literature on the one hand, and then the management or crisis management literature on the other.
So let me see if I understand, because a lot of us have been brought up with the belief that in a crisis you want somebody who has the John Wayne sort of orientation of everything's fine. It's like sort of, and you're saying something different. You're saying that it's okay to show your feelings, that actually that's what people really need, is to know that it's okay to have those feelings as well. That when the leader has it, it makes it easier for everybody else. But that feels a little different than what the normal narrative is. Is that correct?
Well, I think you're onto it. So here's a question for a leader. If something bad happens, can I cry? Or can I get mad? Can I point the finger? Can I, how many degrees of freedom in my range of emotions am I, a range of display am I allowed to have? It comes back to work that you've done for many, many years, Nick, and that is you got to be authentic. You got to be who you are. You got to you've got to be authentic in the moment, in the situation, and with yourself. And when you're authentic, you're allowed a much broader range of emotion than you think you have. You don't have to be on Mount Rushmore. You can be a real person. And what that does is it frees other people up to acknowledge and to experience the feelings they're having too. And so when you bring the organization down to that human to human level, you've got a much better shot at handling the next thing that's going to happen to you.
So last time we talked, Harry, you mentioned both Bush and Obama in a couple of situations where they both did that. Would you be willing to share those? Because I thought those were helpful to me to understand what you were saying. Because initially, as you were saying it, I was like, wait a minute, is that really the right way to do it?
Well, right. I met Bush. I remember standing in a pile of rubble after 9/11 and being mad. Obama, I can remember crying after the shootings in the school in Connecticut.
So why do you think that was okay for them to show those emotions? Because normally when you think of presidents outside of our current scenario, you tend to see them as sort of trying to look like everything's okay even if it isn't.
Right, we have a lot of that right now. With the Obama case, it's completely consistent to what we all know about the man, that he would feel deeply. He'd feel awful. He would think about his own children, and he'd be touched. And so these weren't fake tears. We knew this was consistent, and it was consistent with the moment. We were all feeling dreadful at that time. And with Bush, we see this guy as a guy who can get angry. He's hinted at it. He was hinted at it in press conferences and so forth. And this was a time when it was appropriate to be angry. And we say, yeah, it's exactly. And I remember how wonderful I felt in that moment too, connected to him, connected to everybody else who felt the same thing. And I think that that moment helped us turn the tide and sort of regain our footing. So now neither was planned, so to speak. I mean, neither had advisors say, now I want you to go off and show this emotion. That's not what leaders do. They don't listen to people who tell them to do that anyway. They fire those.
But as we stand here in the coronavirus environment, we think about leading an organization. I have an organization that I run as well. The ability to share our fears or our doubts and let other people, give other people permission to share those so that they don't take us over is what I'm hearing you say, but we're able to be authentic in expressing these. It's not like we're lost in them.
Well, here, I think
we're able to have them.
Yes, you're able to have them. And I think the truth is right now is that we're in a time where we don't have all the answers. We don't know. There's confusion.
Okay.
There is lack of facts and data. And let's admit that. Let's not say we have the answers and I'll get back to you later with what to do with them. That people know better.
People know better. So what are some other things that you discovered when you did this research that would be helpful to leaders on how do they deal with leading in crisis in this moment?
Well, a couple of things. One of them is, one of the phrases that I picked up along the way doing this research is tell the truth and tell it fast. And that is, you tell the truth as you know it, the truth of your experience as a leader. Don't go mute and say, I'll get back to the organization in a couple of days when I have better answers. Speak now and say, this is my take. And then when your take changes, maybe in an hour, go back and say, here's a new one. And keep at it. Keep telling the truth and telling it fast. You're not being held accountable for being accurate moment to moment. You're being held accountable for saying what you know, telling the truth of your experience, and being authentic to people. That's what they want to hear. And if they have better information, they'll tell you. That opens up, by the way, channels to, so maybe you don't have all the information, and now it says you're welcome to hear it. And the more that the more you're engaging people, people feel a part of the story. It's not an outside story that's coming at them. It's a story that they're inside. And that's the experience that you want.
So it's more of an ongoing dialogue as opposed to a one-way communication is what I feel like you're talking.
And it's a shared story.
It's a shared story. Okay.
I think
so it's unfolding and it's a shared story. You're not waiting for the packaged version. I think we've all gotten to the place where nobody wants to see a packaged presentation because we're like, well, how many people touched it? Right? Which means I can't trust it. Okay, what are some other key insights? Because I think you had a number of them when I talked with you last, and I think were just very powerful for people to get a sense of.
Well, one of them is that there's no substitution for you, the leader. You can't delegate stuff. If there's been a terrible accident, someone's in the hospital, don't tell your HR person to go make that visit. You go. If a factory is burned down, you be there. If you've got a war room set up and you're trying to understand a virus or something like that, or what do we do? Be in that room. So you cannot delegate the ultimate authority. That's a mistake. When leaders think that they can, maybe they're uncomfortable. Well, so what? You know, this is yours. Here's the thing about this point, and I think I've just said, people expect you to keep them safe. And when things go off the rails, you're being blamed, whether you feel like you deserve to be blamed or not. You are being blamed. And so that's, as I think about it in baseball terms, that's one strike. Now, if you then hem and haw, or you try to make things nice, or you turn the bad news over to someone else to talk for you, or you issue a memo with Q&A talking points, or you do something else or you talk in facts and data instead of what's really going on and meaning and people, then that's strike two. People can't trust you. Now you're running. You got 2 strikes against you now, and you run your trust scale all the way down. You know, you run out of trust, and I don't think leaders get that. The crisis is about their leadership as much as it's about the crisis.
Because that's what people are going to remember, aren't they? So one of my questions is, since this is the Leading from Purpose podcast, is, so where do you see that purpose having a role for a leader in crisis?
Well, and I will tell this story about one of the stories it's one of the stories in the book, about a man who was in charge of Entergy Corporation during Katrina. Now we're talking a lot about Katrina again right now, you know, how it was handled or mishandled, and frankly, how it came up out of the blue. The Army Corps of Engineers did not expect what happened in New Orleans, and all the docs in the country did not expect this coronavirus to be doing what it's doing. So we have a situation on our hands that's unexpected. We call this a rogue wave, and it's not something you can sort of say, go blame somebody on. I mean, there are these events in life that does take over. Now the question.
So, like a rogue wave is what? Just
well, here's a rogue wave.
What does that mean?
In scientific sort of meteorological terms, you can be on an open ocean, a blue sky, and calm weather, and a light shop, and then suddenly there's a wave that's too times taller than any normal height of the largest wave that you're going to get arrives, and you've got to face it. And the only thing you can hope for is that the bow of your ship is facing the wave, because if it hits you broadside, you're spinning around like a top. And you also hope that your ship can take it. So that's a rogue wave. You can't predict them. And so
it feels like the coronavirus really is a rogue wave then, or
it's a rogue wave.
Hurricane is a rogue wave, yeah?
It completely is a rogue wave. Katrina blew up in a way that nobody had expected. So here's, his name is Rod West, and he was the head of operations at Entergy for New Orleans when this thing hit. And the first thing he did after Katrina had passed through was get in a helicopter and see what damage had been done and look down on the city. Well, he's up in a helicopter and looking down and not understanding what he's seeing, because he's seeing flooded houses everywhere, and he didn't know what they were. When it finally dawned on him, and here he is, he's stunned. His helicopter pilot, who had been a Iraqi war veteran, was crying, and he realized he had to come down and tell the truth and tell it fast to his team. Now, he had sent all of the people are going to turn the lights back on, and that's both gas and electricity, to Baton Rouge, out of harm's way, so we could rally them there and then bring them back in the city to save the city.
Sure.
So he knew he's in his helicopter. He's going to fly to Baton Rouge. He's got to meet his team and tell them and give them instructions as what to do. So, and I've done this exercise with groups, and I asked the question: what would you're Rod West now, what would you tell the team? And I would tell you, Nick, and this is not a great result. Most people in these workshops will say stuff like, well, you have to say, well, we're looking into it. If there's any problem here, we'll get the insurance people to help you. We've got an HR person standing by. We're not really sure what we saw. This kinds of stuff. That's not what Rod did. Rod came into the room. He saw people waiting with bated breath to hear what he was going to say, because CNN hadn't taken pictures yet, so nobody knew what the damage was.
Right.
And he walked in and he said, I have some news for you on what I've seen. And he said, the city of New Orleans is 9 feet under water. And that means for everyone in this room, or most of the people in this room, your houses are 9 feet under water.
Wow.
You can imagine what that would be. Now that's a jolt of truth that you say, how could a leader do that to people? Well, that's what was needed for them to understand that Rod was on their side. Rod was not going to bullshit, and they were going to do something here to save New Orleans, because that was his ask. We have to go and save New Orleans, and I'm not letting you out to go save your house or save your grandmother. We got to save the city. And almost without exception, that's what they did. They signed up. They realized they had a larger mission. They realized that they were on the truth. They realized that Rod was with them, and he was going to lead the way, and off they went. So the question is, how could Rod have pulled this off? This remarkable story of communication and courage. Well, it turns out Rod didn't come into this thing unprepared. He, as a child, his elementary school teachers thought this kid has got leadership beyond his years. When he was age 30, his father was killed suddenly by a falling tree, and Rod, it really caught him up short, and he had to understand what leadership is, and he turned to, believe it or not, the whole idea of servant leadership, and as a way to cope with these situations. Be a servant. You can mourn the loss of your father. You can honor the loss of your dad if you're going to help other people. It also turns out that Rod was a citizen of New Orleans. He'd gone to Notre Dame and played on Lou Holtz's national championship team. And the motto of that team was WIN, W-I-N, which stood for what's important now.
Really? Oh, interesting.
And so he had all of this sort of inside him already, this belief in him from a teacher, this this crucible experience of death of his father, this wonderful coach who was on his side, and what he had learned on the gridiron. And so he came into this thing really, if you will, and he had a happy marriage, and he was dedicated to Marlins, and all the rest of it. He believed in the company. He's still there, so he was preset. Now, one of the realizations that we have here is that we invented a word. We called it pre-resilience. There's an awful lot of resiliency is important. Readiness is one thing. Readiness, can you handle it? Resilience is, can you get through it? Well, what's pre-resilience? It's the reserve you have. You may not know it, but it's sitting there waiting for you.
Oh, that's really interesting. So what you think is that because of his challenging life experiences, we could usually call those crucibles in some of the work we do in authentic leadership, and the journey he'd been on with working with people who had a real sense of purpose, and him tasting what purpose felt like, that his reserve was much greater than other people. So when that crisis happened, he had the reserve to tap into.
He had reserve to tap into, and this is why. And I'll put another pitch in for the work that you do, Nick, and that is to get people to wake up and to understand who they are, understand what's going on, what they come in with. Now, it's important to sharpen it. It's important to reflect on it. It's important to distill it. That's what I think purpose is. When you come out of your workshop, you've distilled something that stands for a whole lot of other stuff. But it's a distillation. It's a placeholder.
Interesting.
It's a door that opens up into your whole reserve.
I mean, I never thought about this. It's really interesting, Harry, as you talk about it. And this is your gift to me over the many years, is that whenever we have a conversation like this, I think there's always this big aha that I have. I'm like, oh, okay, this makes complete sense. And why didn't I see this before? The power of owning the reserve and being able to have it and leverage it when you need it. And if you don't think you have it, because the research on stress is very similar. The research on stress shows that what causes you to be in the fight or flight mode, which is the part of stress we hate, or the challenge response, which is what Tom Brady did a couple of years ago when he won the Super Bowl against the Falcons. That's the challenge response, where you just take it and you run with it. And the difference is that when you believe you don't have the resources internally, you go to fight or flight mode. And when you do believe you have the resources, which is always an internal narrative anyway, you make it happen. And in some ways, it's what a coach does to a football team. And what it has halftime speech always matters is it's the question as to, does he get them to access the reserve? And I think what's interesting is that in the case of Rod, it sounds like he was really good at accessing his reserve, but not just that, but he was great at helping everybody else access their reserve.
Well, you're on to the virtuous cycle of all of this, and I think this is as important as anything to talk about today. And that is, let me give you another example of a different example of a crisis situation. I've been working more and more with the healthcare community, which was under stress before the coronavirus.
Sure.
Burnout is, I've heard 50% of the healthcare workers are suffering burnout, and it's for all kinds of reasons. But suicide is way up among doctors.
Really?
It's the highest professional group. The highest rate among professional groups. So I was talking to a doctor about this, and doctors take mistakes very seriously. And it's not like, oh yeah, I missed that diagnosis or that treatment, that was wrong. I'll go home and have a cocktail, it'll be good. That's not what doctors are. They live with it. And so I asked the doctor, what do you do when you made a mistake and you know you made a mistake? And here's the key point. And this moves me to even say this because it's so simple. He says, I go sit on a bedside and I hold a patient's hand. You know, what's the wisdom here? What's going on? He's getting out of himself. He's providing service to others. He's exercising compassion. Not just he feels for the person in the bed, he's actually doing something for that person in the bed. Now you say, well, what's going on here? Well, that's how he is doing self-help, self-healing. That's how he's taking care of himself. So a big thing in all of this is not just what Rod West did in his moment of glory, but how did he take care of himself afterwards?
So how did he take care of himself? Because I guess his house was underwater too, right?
Say that again?
I mean, how did he take care of himself during Katrina? Because I would assume that his house was underwater just like everybody else's.
Well, his house wasn't underwater, but he was barricaded in a hotel downtown living on a cot, and his family was away, and he had no contact with them. He was, you can imagine, the kind of sleepless nights he was experiencing, caring for the city as deeply as he did, caring for his workers, caring for his job and his family. And so a couple of things there. The phrase we used here, it's an old one, but it's the idea of a dark night of the soul. And leaders right now, you can imagine how many doctors right now already coming in burned out, and now seeing how we are handling the coronavirus.
Or not handling the coronavirus.
Not handling it. And this isn't just a matter of do no harm. This is also a matter, for many doctors, it's a moral question, which is eating them up. How do they handle this? And then the worst of all is, how do they handle it when their colleagues are affected? In other words, how do they take care of their coworkers, not just their patients? Well, what I'm reading and what I'm understanding is how important compassion is, and that's the virtuous cycle. You help.
So what is compassion as opposed to like empathy? Because those two words I know are
good. Simply, empathy is all right, Nick. I feel your pain. Compassion is, Nick, I'm going to get close to you. I'm going to find out what's going on. I'm going to be there with you. You're going to know I'm around. And if there's something I can do, I'm going to do it. In other words,
compassion has an active element to it.
Correct.
Empathy is just letting you know that I feel for you.
You may not even have to let you know, but people, I'm so empathetic about those poor people stuck on that boat off the coast of San Francisco right now. Yeah, I got empathy for that. But compassion would be, if you're close to the scene, it'd be doing something. It'd be actually, or being on the boat.
It seems like that would just burn me out even more, Harry. So how does that, for these people, help them? Well, how does it help them build that reserve back? Because I would think that if we look at crisis, if we look at normal life, the ones that most of us live in, is there's a ebb and a flow, and you got your weekends and your cocktails and everything sort of balances out, and you go on vacation, it makes it bigger, and you go back to work, it makes it smaller, but you sort of whatever. And now we all of a sudden put everybody in this intensive pressure cooker where we don't know where the end game is. And it's like, so how does compassion actually do this?
Well, here's the burnout is when you're feeling compromised morally or professionally. The burnout is when you don't feel the agency. You can't do anything about the situation you're in. And you're completely flummoxed. And it's why compassion is a breakout from that. It breaks out of that loop.
So there's actually research that was done on doctors at University of Buffalo, where they took a large number of doctors who were showing signs of depression. And if they look at the scale on the 1 to 20 ratio, 1 to 20 number, the lower the number is, the higher the sense of possibility of depression. And most of them were like at an 8 or a 7. And what they did is they put them through a 6-week process in which basically they helped them step in a couple hours a week and look at what had they done that week that was the most meaningful for them. And what was interesting is when they actually had to acknowledge where it was the most meaningful moment for them, which I would bet was the moment where the compassion piece showed up as well, Harry. So I'm sort of putting 2 to 2 together as I'm thinking about this research. When they looked at the data about 3 months later and they scored them again all the doctors had scores that were like 18, 19, and 20.
Right.
This had had such a huge impact on reframing the actions that they had been taking had not changed. No, they hadn't changed any of the steps they were taking or any of their routine to some degree. But what they had done is actually reflected on where the meaning was, which in some sense, what you're saying that I think really is helpful to me is it's like, how do you put oxygen back in? Is, this natural ability for us to not just have meaning, but to experience the meaning as we are interacting with someone and showing compassion. Why do people go do nonprofit things on their free time? Is because it's what creates more oxygen for us. And so in crisis, it's like, how do we taking care of others? It seems like you'd want to just take care of yourself. You go to Costco, you buy your cans of tuna and your toilet paper, and you just lock yourself up in a room someplace. But you're saying something that is the opposite, which is you need to be buying the cans of tuna and the toilet paper for all your colleagues and friends who didn't do any planning, so that you can help take care of them when all hell breaks loose.
Well, I am indeed. How do you get out of your own bubble? And how do you get into, how do you shift the grounds? How do you get a new lease on life? And you do that with other people.
Interesting.
It's the magic of service.
As you're saying this, Harry, it's interesting how this all makes darn sense, but it all seems very counterintuitive.
This is why it's not in the literature.
No. And so, what I like about the Rod story is that it sort of feels visceral, which is he sounds like one of the doctors in China, which is he's sleeping on a cot. He doesn't know what's going to happen next. He's going to take care of everybody.
Right.
So how does it turn out for him? Because you sort of tell us the beginning of the story, but I'm not sure we know what the sort of how did it. All
right. So it's a long story. One of the things you have to look at is what happened in New Orleans, and ultimately, New Orleans did get its lights turned back on. If you've been back to New Orleans since Katrina, you can see progress. It's not the perfect city, but they put a new school system. They have an awful lot of things I can point to as progress and things they fixed since Katrina. So one of the things you have to think about is how do you turn a crisis or a catastrophe into something that over time is redemptive, is where things are better. And Rob is a part of that story. He's also personally benefited. He's been promoted once or twice, I think, since then. He's risen to a very senior role in Entergy. Another part of all this that we need to talk about is the question of story. And I think I briefly said, if a leader thinks his job is to spew facts and data and let people draw their own conclusions, I think that's a miss. People want to have meaning. They want to hear your meaning. They want to connect the dots. They want to know how you're in the story too. These aren't just abstract things that you're reading off and telling people what to do. That's the stuff that they will tell and then retell, and then they'll get retold. And what you're really doing is building social capital with story. You're getting people talking to one another. Our leader said this, and this is what I think about that. Then that gets retold, and the next thing gets retold. And next thing you know, you've got a community, not just a bunch of people in an organization. And they're making meaning out of it, which is really the missing piece that falls out. Like right now, it's so hard for us with the coronavirus to make meaning. What is it? Where did it come from? Where's it gonna go? What does it mean right now? We're not getting any help on that. And so we're all kind of making stuff up. I've had conversations with friends of mine, and you have too. And it's amazing the range of sort of reaction and perspective they have on it. I have some friends saying, let's just forget about it, making too much of it. And others are in complete panic mode. And so the meaning function right now has dropped out. And seeing a bar chart of how many people are sick today is just, that's not helping. That's not enough. I don't want to disguise that stuff, but we need to understand where this goes and what's happening in other countries and what our efforts are and what might we do and why this is important and why this is different from other things and all that kind of stuff is important to us. And that's the job of, here's another phrase we came up with, the leader's job is storyteller in chief. You can't, you're that. You're the authority, and the same word means author.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
And
An author is also at its core. Yes, that's great.
And the other thing is story implies restore.
Oh, interesting. I like that one.
So all of that says, even if you're someone who is not inclined to venture far from the facts and data, and you're the leader, even the slightest movement from your normal pattern, as people know you, will make a big difference. So storytelling is it's as natural to people as breathing. And I don't like it when leaders say, I will tell a story, I'm not good at that. Well, yes, you are. And we need you now. We need you to put yourself into the situation because you're one of us and we're one of you. And it's that knitting together part. It's that connecting all of us and letting us be ourselves and also being a part of the whole.
That's beautiful, because I really agree with you. And I think that when people say, what does this mean to somebody, it's a leadership moment, because the answer you give it creates a reality. And the question is, what's the story that you're telling? And I do know that if I say, well, here's what it means, and you just use the data, but if you tell a story of your own personal life and say, well, let me tell you a little bit about my own experience of dealing with crazy moments and what's happened. And here's some thoughts about how you might think about what you want to do with this. I think we get to something that's more personal, but it also allows us to share some of our feelings in a way that might be safe as well. And I think that's part of what we need to be able to talk through. I think that in these times of greater crisis, the more we talk about our own journey and our own moments in crisis where we have been humbled and where we were freaked out, but truth is that we didn't have a reason to be, or that things turned out in a better way, or turned out as to whatever, and we had to sort of take a left or right turn. I think that's an insight that both I think you and I, Harry, have worked with people on, but I think it's really important. So here's the thing. I believe that some of the things you've been talking about, that they are extremely helpful to me personally in this moment in time. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to do this podcast with you, Harry, was I was a bit selfish, which is I wanted to give you a chance to unpack some of this deep wisdom that you have so that I could get the benefit of it. And I hope that anybody who's listening to the podcast is able to get there's a lot more insights in my experience from having read the book, that just because there's a lot of things to think about when you think about what does it mean to lead in a time of crisis and who am I in that context. I do think one exercise for everybody who's listening is to go think about write the story of when you've been most challenged in your life, or write 2 or 3 of those stories and look at how you dig yourself out. And there's a pattern there. And that's the gift that will always take care of you. It's probably as connected to purpose as anything, is how you dig yourself out of those. And that's your version of how you do it. Because you know what? Each one of us has a different way of doing it. And so, Harry, as always, one of the things I like to do at the end of this podcast is ask if you have a particular quote that you feel that really speaks to you, and for you to share it with us. And then what does that quote mean for you?
I do. Let me, I sent it on to you before the podcast, but I want to see if I can, and I wrote it down because it's one of my favorites.
It's the problem with one of your favorites is that you forget it.
There's so many.
There's someplace, right, Harry?
But this is so important. I want to absolutely get it right. But I'll just tell you what it is. And that is self-development is a higher duty than self-sacrifice for a leader.
Okay, so what does that mean for you?
It means that it's not leaders who think their job is to just rush into battle and come what may, risk all if you will. That's not the point of leadership. We need you to stay alive. We need you to take care of yourself. We need you to do whatever you've got to do to grow in your job. Your growth is important to us. Your own individual leadership growth is important to all of us. And that's what's important. And I'll say one more thing too about all this. There's an opportunity in a crisis for leader that often is not taken up. And that is this, that in a crisis, people expect you to behave differently. So if you suddenly come out with a new way of behaving and emoting, and you've got some new plans, and you're showing up with the people more than you ever have before, that's expected. That's like, oh wow, that person is responding in a crisis the way we would want. You've got the old bounds you think you have around you have been broken. Take the opportunity people expect it and be all you can be. Be authentic, but take off your, the whatever restraints you feel you have. Get out of your own way, I would say, and lead.
Beautiful, Harry. Well, Harry, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your insights with me. You and I have worked with each other for a long period of time. And I remember once getting on an airplane and this guy sits next to me, looks at me, he says, you look really familiar. Do you know Harry Hutson? Because he looks like he could be your older brother. And I just laughed so hard. And it happened like 2 or 3 times around the world where people, and if I was to wear your glasses, people would be really going, oh my goodness, are you guys really, I do feel like in many ways, Harry, that you are my older brother. And in this moment, in this conversation today, I feel like I was a student of some beautiful wisdom that you brought to us today. So I want to thank you for bringing the gift of your purpose to all of us.
Well, I'm on fire on this stuff, Nick, and I have an awful lot to thank you for on my journey. So this is two-way street.
Great. So I want to wish you all a wonderful day. Thank you for listening to another Leading from Purpose podcast.